As Christians, do we have a moral obligation to be involved in the public square? Should we vote? Is it irresponsible not to? What conditions should we put on signing off on any given political party or politician? With so many people talking about choosing the lesser of two evils, at some point, should we simply just abstain from giving our vote to any sort of evil? And alternatively, if you choose not to participate in electing leadership, do you still have the right to complain about elected leaders and the issues of our day? We're going to be talking about all of that and more on today's debate with Theology on Air. Theology on Air, of course, is an offshoot of Theology by the Pint, where we gather together in Houston to talk about all kinds of interesting things around the Bible and theology and faith and culture and even sometimes politics, which today we're going to kind of get into. But of course, we can go more in depth here on the podcast. And so we encourage you to listen and write us a review. That helps the algorithms and people find us. Give us 5 stars, hit bells, do all the things on YouTube or on your podcast platform. But if you want more information about our organization, you can go to theologybythepint.org, find out about upcoming events, find out about who we are, what we're about. But let me tell you just a little bit about what we're doing today and who I have in the studio with me. These are 2 familiar faces or voices if you listen to our stuff or you come to our events. And I have with me Evan McClanahan. He's the pastor at First Lutheran and does a lot of the podcasts with us. And Ken Cowan, who is on our board. He does our finances. He won't tell anyone where he works, but he will hand you a beer ticket at our events. And what you don't know is that behind the scenes, when we have group texts or we have a group messaging system where we kind of talk about articles that we're going to be putting in our White Pill Radio episodes, these 2 are the ones that are the most vocal and get into it and sort of lovingly bicker with each other. And so we decided to take all of that to the airwaves because one of the biggest beefs that always kind of comes down to with these 2, we've joked and told you that Ken is our local anarchist, or resident anarchist, I should say, and sometimes doesn't vote. He'll tell you about that. And Evan gets annoyed that because Ken doesn't vote, but then he complains about things, that he doesn't have the right to complain about such things because he didn't make his voice heard. So we decided to just actually hash it out here on an episode for you to hear. But they are brothers in Christ and they love each other. But tonight we're going to let them bicker a little bit. So the question on the table is, should Christians vote? I'm going to let them each kind of say their piece and we're going to get into it. So without further ado, Evan, do you want to start us off?
I'll start us off since I'm the affirmative in this case. So thank you for hosting. Yeah. Thank you for being here. I think this will be a fun conversation.
Me too.
So the short answer, well, first, I want to say there are 2 main kind of meta topics that I think undergird this. And one is whether Christians should seek to have dominion. I think that's a major topic we need to think about. And then the other is whether the law is good. So I just want to put that out as framing devices, if you will. But the short answer is yes, Christians should vote. And assuming relatively normal circumstances, which we can maybe, kind of get into. There are going to be some crazy situations in which you shouldn't vote. But as far as I've been alive, yes, the situation has been that Christians should vote. And the short answer is because if we don't, then the barbarians will rule, and I don't want to live under them,
Yeah.
So rather, I think we are to have dominion over all the earth, and we are to bring Christ to the nations. Paul writes, "My goal is that they may be encouraged in heart and united in love, so that they may have the full riches of complete understanding, in order that they may know the mystery of God, namely Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge." So yes, this is a text about gospel proclamation. We need to take the gospel to the world so that the world can know the full riches of Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. But if all of those things are hidden in Christ, then I want every area of life to be guided by the Christian worldview. That includes morality and economics and civil rights and et cetera, everything. So, of course, this is not a biblical law or mandate. I'm not saying that Christians must vote. This is just my pastoral admonition. You're free not to vote, but you should vote. Now, the longer answer is that so long as we have the opportunity to have influence, and exercise dominion in the world in the name of Christ, we should use any mechanism that we can to do so, which includes, but of course is not limited to, voting. In America in 2025, voting is the primary method by which we engage in the political process. It's also the easiest. It doesn't cost anything. It's an easy thing to do that we should be doing. Of course, I think we should also be exerting, pressure or having influence in, other realms as well, like preaching and media and writing books and hosting interesting podcasts and anything we can do. Every area we should be out there talking about Christianity. But at some point, a worldview will either be synthesized into specific policies at the expense of other options, or it will have no influence at all. And if I have to choose between those, I want some idea, some worldview synthesized into policies. So, for example, should we as a nation or state fund Planned Parenthood? Should we engage in global wars? Should we be a welfare state? Should we have open borders? Should we have a balanced budget? All of those questions and their answers are addressed, or if they are addressed, by our political process or leaders at all, and we'd probably both agree that they're not nearly as well as they ought to be, they will be synthesized into peculiar policies with unique candidates giving a voice and vote to those systems. The easiest way that Christians can enact this worldview is by, I would like to think, voting. I take it as a given, by the way, that Christians should be running for office, from everything from dog catcher to HOA board president to president of the United States and everything in between. Now, I will already grant that a vote is going to be a choice of a lesser of two evils. I'm just going to grant that, okay? Because that's inescapable in a fallen world. There's, Jesus isn't running for president. He's already the king. So there's that. And do I sometimes then have to hold my nose? Yes. I mean, have I voted for some pretty terrible people? Yes. Is my candidate some kind of, messiah for the nation? No. But if I say that the shortcomings in the process would preclude my being involved with them, then I would also have to say that I can't be involved in my church because it's a messed up process too, or my neighborhood Little League. Oh man, I could tell you some Little League stories. So I recognize as well as a kind of caveat that our particular situation in the history of the Christian church is pretty unique. We haven't been Republican democracies, or whatever we are, for more than a couple of 100 years. And so most Christians in history were unable to vote, and they had to have influence on the culture in other ways. Think about the early church and the way they influenced the world, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the ways in which the church became sort of Christendom and treated pagans as badly as the pagans treated them is, not a good thing. But that said, while we can vote, we should. Finally, I asked Grok, that's X's AI, what percentage of Christians did not vote in 2024? And it said this: considering these ranges, this is a summary of their thought of all the different caveats. A reasonable estimate is that 40 to 49% of Christians did not vote in 2024, with 44% being a commonly cited figure from post-election analysis. Wow. Now, I will grant that it is hard to know what a Christian is. Okay. But it seems safe that millions of Christians did not vote. So even if they don't have the principled reasons for not voting that Ken did, they just didn't bother to show up and exercise their worldview in the public space. If they did, then, there's not an election that Christians wouldn't win. We would dominate, school boards, and we would, have different tax policies, and we might have different warfare policies, or whatever the case may be. At least I'd like to think that. I mean, I do want to come back later if you want to point out the failures of the systems, I would like to talk about that because there is some truth in that. But at the end of the day, the question is, what kind of world do I want, and how do I go about getting it? The easiest and most important way to do this is by voting. Even if voting only plays a minor role in such a world, in the cultural impact we have, or just the way we're salt and leaven, throughout the culture. Even if it's a minor thing, it's still something that we should do because we should be doing everything we can. So yes, Christians should vote.
All right, pause for applause. Ken, your thoughts. Should Christians vote?
All right. The resolution is, should Christians vote? One might think that answering in the negative is saying, no, the Christian should not vote. But that itself is an entirely different affirmative statement. My answer is simply no. More specifically, no, the Christian, as a matter of conscience, may abstain. right? Now, a minority of Christian denominations do explicitly instruct their congregations not to vote, right? The Christadelphians, most of them anyways, some Church of Christ branches, and almost all Anabaptist traditions practice abstinence. Some churches, rather than having fissures driven by the visceral politics that we all know and love, rather than having those fissures in their flocks, they advocate for a measured withdrawal from the political in order to preserve a kindred congregation. Some teach that the prophetic scriptures in Daniel and Revelation describe governments of the world inevitably drifting further and further from God, and they warn against taking part in such corrupting governments, in the nature of these governments being corrupt, from the start, as evidence in prophecy. Some pacifist churches, this would be more of the ideology that I align with, even though I'll get into my ideology later. Some pacifist ideologies argue that casting ballots places the blood guilt on the believer for every bullet fired in a war, right? That that every bullet, every bomb, they're bought by a ballot that should not be bought by the believer. So even at these extremes, I see these Christians as deserving of respect, and I see their political opinions as deserving of respect. Evan, I call these Christians my brothers and sisters, just like I call Evan my brother, alongside all the Christians like him that assign a moral imperative to voting. I implore Christians to treat the political and theological opinions of those that disagree on this topic with respect. We talk inside baseball. You mentioned at the beginning, this all came from our group chats. A peek behind the curtain that we far too often do in white pill radio. Evan and I both agree on limiting principles. Evan mentioned in his opening statement that there are limits to this. Well, should you vote for the lesser of two evils, right? Eventually evil becomes way too obvious to ignore. We chatted about a proposed 2028 hypothetical scenario where a neo-Hitler and a neo-Stalin are nominated as the RNC and DNC candidates, right? And Evan and I both agree, okay, well, no. At that point in time, we go out in the woods and, we're
start a commune.
Yeah, we're basically, hoarders with our prep buckets of food. So Evan and I both agree the lesser of two evils game, in that scenario, right, playing that game is probably antithetical to Christian values, right? At some point, you are casting your lot with evil. Evan and I both agree in these limiting principles. Evan's condemnation of abstinence, therefore, is a matter of degree, and I can respect that, right? What we don't agree on is where to draw that line, how much evil you're willing to tolerate, and how much in what you say represents you, because that's what representative democracy is. You are casting a ballot and saying, this person represents me, and simply because your representative is the lesser evil, how much evil are you willing to tolerate representing you? And in conclusion, theology by the pint and theology on air at their heart are about passionate but charitable disagreements. National politics does something strange to the Christian, right? I've seen my opponent, Evan, engage respectfully with a wide breadth of theological opinions. We've witnessed him engage with various wacky eschatologies and treat them with respect. Politics is a funny thing to the human brain. As many of you have personally experienced at your own dinner tables, the habitat of charitable political disagreements is facing extinction, replaced by an invasive species, the partisan. This temperament has regrettably infected the church. It's infected the church, and it's become much more severe in the last couple decades, and seems to be of a different species than other theological disagreements, right? Discussions about the rapture, the age of the earth, they're heated, but they rarely evoke this hellish demeanor that turns the scholar into a scold or a schoolmarm, right? So just disagree politely and respect other people's opinions, even if you think they're wacky.
All right.
Yeah.
But I do have one follow-up question for you before I let you guys go back and forth a little bit.
Sure.
You can abstain from answering if you want. But why did you not vote in 2024?
Yeah.
Why not?
The policies that Trump was running on, I along with, I don't want to get into specific policies and specific proclamations, but along with the January 6th thing, I thought to be disqualifying.
It was a bridge too far for you to.
Yeah. The Evan and I totally disagree on this, but what I saw is an attempt to steal the election, right? With the we'll talk about
That's okay, but
false electors or
Yeah.
fraudulent electors, and we can talk about that in a white pill radio or something.
Yeah.
okay, got
was,
it.
It was the Green Bay sweep. That was the plan. The Green Bay sweep.
I have no idea what that is, but okay.
Yeah, I don't want to get in the weeds, but there were disqualifications, right? That's
Well,
my answer.
I asked
viewed-
because the whole thing was born out of the fact that every time you say something about Trump that you don't like, or some policy or something that's actually happening now, Evan will be like, "Remind me who you voted for," and you're like, "Ah."
Well, to be fair, to be charitable, you said that back when we complained about Biden, right?
Yeah.
You would say, "Well, who did you vote for?"
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's like, be the change you want to see in the
Yeah,
world.
yeah, it's like, well, exactly.
I mean, but even if the guy at the top of a presidential ticket or gal isn't your cup of tea, there are local elections that are important and
True.
And you abstain from those as well?
Sometimes, most of the time.
Yeah.
And I will say this though. I said it was a moral imperative. I wouldn't say that it's
Okay.
a moral imperative
You
because
said,
that's a matter of do. I mean, I think
What's the difference between should versus like must, right? The difference that you were saying as a pastor, you would employ your flock to do this,
Yeah.
but it's not a moral, like scriptural imperative.
Mandate.
It's just something that you think is the moral thing to do. So
What did I say?
talk me through that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Christians should vote because they should exercise
Dominion.
they should have their stewardship. This is part of having dominion on the world. All things being equal, they should vote. I don't know how else to say it. I mean,
But split the difference between like the must versus the should, right? That you were trying to.
well, must would mean that you are doing some kind of spiritual harm if you do not vote.
Okay.
That. Well, I mean, what is another must?
You must be faithful to your wife, like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say, I mean, and then there's of course a whole other question that we've talked about many times. Is like, well, who should you vote for? And so those issues do kind of tie in because I do think you can get closer to a moral imperative if you start talking about the blood guilt questions. Okay, if you're comfortable with the reality that's a lesser of two evils, okay, then you start talking about blood guilt. I think that can go the other way as well. So, for example, the pacifist can say, "Well, golly gee, we engage in bad wars, and I don't want to give my vote to someone who's going to kill the Houthis." Kind of started this whole thing, I think, actually. Over there, and I don't want I'm a pacifist. I don't want my blood to be on there. Well, okay, so. But if you don't vote for this party that might engage in killing people for the sake of this war, the other party might win. And I know you don't like this kind of reductionism, but sorry, it's a two-party system. It's what we got. That, will fully fund Planned Parenthood and da-da-da-da. Which, by the way, both sides fund Planned Parenthood, which kills lots of babies.
Yeah.
But we're getting, finally, after decades and decades, we may be getting closer to not funding Planned Parenthood with federal tax dollars.
Well, and this would get me into the abolitionist versus the practicalist, perspective on abortion, right? The abolitionist would say, not 1 inch of concession, right? And then the practicalist would say, like, Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade is the closest that we've ever gotten. And if you held fast to a abolitionist perspective,
You would have lost out on that.
Exactly. So,
Yeah, but
tell me the difference.
To have
Sure.
influence in the abolitionist conversation, you need to participate in the political process. And for example, in Texas, there was a lot of grassroots work done to overturn a number of what we would consider rhinos who are not
What's a rhino?
abolitionists, a Republican in name only, people who are affiliated with the pro-life community who are not abolitionists because those are the dueling factions in the broadly speaking pro-life world. No, they are most surely.
Well, we'd say
duly,
abolitionists are pro-life.
the
right?
abolitionist bill in Texas right now was killed by the pro-life community again 2 weeks ago. The pro-life community kills abolition bills in state after state
Oh, the
after
irony.
state
Well, I would say-
after state.
Pro-life is the umbrella, and abolitionists
Yes.
is a faction underneath there.
Yeah.
And then the practicalists, right? The pragmatists are
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, but they kill the abolition bills. But my point is that
alongside the Democrats.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes.
So
My point is, say a candidate like I believe his name is Brent Money. I believe that he won in a primary. I think I might be wrong, but let's say he did. He won in a primary in the last year, and he put forward an abolition bill. Abolitionists worked to get him elected as a state rep in Texas. They went to the polls. They put their money. They did the door knocking. They gave money to his campaign, and he fulfilled his promise. He said, I will put an abolition bill into Texas." He did it. He sponsored it. It got forward. Did it make it out of committee? No. Was that his fault? No. That the people got it that far because they participated in the process. So shouldn't they participate in that process?
This remind, I don't know. I am grateful for the ones that do. But you know, the word should versus must versus like, I'm not even willing to put the word should on that, right? Whereas you might not put the word must, but you will put the word should. You see what I mean?
Well, shouldn't they have abolished slavery?
Hey guys, Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much. And now back to our show.
Well,
Here we go.
Okay, so my favorite people in the abolitionist, like in the OG abolitionist movement, are the anarchists, Lysander Spooner, William Lloyd Garrison, right? The people that were advocating for a withdrawal. So there's a fun alternate history where 10 years before the Civil War, William Lloyd Garrison, who published a newspaper called The Liberator, where every week he would issue this publication under the banner "No Union with Slaveholders." Right? In an alternate history where he's able to convince New England states to secede from the Union, right? Because they have no union with slaveholders, like I'm sure Sherman would have marched north instead to keep the Union intact. But like, those are my people, the people that vote, not vote, or just practice the act of stepping away, right? I like that.
Okay, so is the theory that the government sort of sanctions slavery, and so if we don't have the government, we lose slavery?
It's if the government is not going to abolish slavery, then we will.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
As individuals.
So let's say Louisiana.
Yeah. Because you had mentioned Christian dominion. Your first two principles were Christian dominion and is the law good. Yeah. This brings me perfectly to Christians breaking the law. In New England states, the Fugitive Slave Act was the law. You had to return runaway slaves. This was part of the nullification crisis where New England states just gave the middle finger to the federal government and said, like, no, we're not going to, right? That is outside of politics.
You're saying that runaway slaves that went to the north and they were told return the slave, and they said no.
The Fugitive Slave Act was the law of the land, said you must return the slaves, even though you're a free state and they're a slave state.
Similar to like housing Jewish people during the
they're technically so.
Did they do the right thing?
It's apolitical, right? It's actually anti-political, right? Is the law good? Well, not in that case.
Well, I mean, Acts 5, what does Peter say?
I almost have Acts 5 memorized, but not quite yet.
No. I mean, it's
the more steel man is Romans 13, right?
Well, Acts 5 is, I would Romans 13 is complicated.
I agree.
I would say Acts 5 is simpler, where it's what God we'll do what God says is good, basically, even if man says it's.
Oh yeah, no, that's awesome.
Okay. Sorry, so I'll look that up in a second, or maybe Sarah's googling it. But I have to change the camera. Sorry, these two cameras. It's hard. I need a producer. If only I had a producer. Okay,
let's all vote on who we think.
But let's say this. So it's like, let's say Louisiana says, "Oh, okay, you guys want to withdraw from the process? Well, we want to keep our slaves. So you and what army is going to come stop us? Because an anarchic principle." What does that build? I've never really understood this. Anarchy builds what?
So, well, I'm not really here to argue anarchy,
Fair.
Right? We've done that on another, and just like you're not here to argue, like, this neo-Republican Steve Bannonism, right? Like, neither one of us are here to, like, talk about our underlying principles. This is mainly about, like, should the Christian vote, and to a greater extent participate in the political process by voting. And I would say some of the greatest things done in like the history of our nation are done outside of the political process, right?
Yeah.
So for example, the Fugitive Slave Act that I mentioned is done like in opposition to the entire political process. We don't care if we're a free state, you're a slave state, but the Supreme Court ruled. Like, no, screw that. We're going to operate outside the realm of politics.
Obey God rather than men.
Oh, definitely.
Yes,
Yes.
I found it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Obey God rather
529.
than- So, yeah. So, of course I agree with that.
Sure.
I mean, and I disagree with every Christian who justified, slavery in the name of Jesus. I did a whole interview with Joel McDermott many years ago. It's probably, I don't know, disappeared now. I think it was on Facebook, about his book about the problem of slavery in Christian America. So yes, I mean, I agree with you. But again, I would argue that ultimately it was a political process. I mean, in England, it was famously William Wilberforce who, worked through Parliament for 30 years to get the slave trade abolished.
One of the, it's kind of like how people argue about the Soviet Union, like what brutal, awful regime, what collapsed it, right? Was it us outspending them? Was it, all of the space race, or was it just failed from the start, right? I think, and
I think we talked about this almost last
we,
week.
we talked about
cracked
it
it open,
after
then
the last
yeah.
one ended,
Yeah.
And
Gorbachev and Reagan.
And again,
Yes.
I think as horrible as slavery is, and as horrible as the political process is for allowing it, I do think it was a failed system, right?
Mhm.
I think that the
held the
South,
South back for decades.
which is why I hate things like the 1619 Project, which talks about like America being built on slavery. Now, I actually think America was held back by slavery, and that is kind of shown by the Civil War. The North had industrialization, and the South had tobacco and cotton. And like, I don't care how good the Southern generals were, right? You can't outcompete like the manufacturing powerhouse that was the North, right? I think it was and as much as I hate the Civil War, and part of me thinks that like Lincoln was a great man and a flawed man, just like Thomas Jefferson was a great man and flawed man. I don't know how justified like the invasion of the South is, right? The whole brother against brother thing is something that like Lincoln regretted, and to invade the South because hindsight's 2020. We have the rose-colored glasses of history. We can see that they would not have slaves now had they been successful in seceding. We wouldn't have a Federal Reserve either, right? We wouldn't be a global empire. We would not be starting wars in every country and in the word "stan," right? I do wonder, had one evil not taken place, had it not snowballed into other evils. You had asked me a question about like, well, I think you had both raised the question. Well, like, aren't you guilty of what happens if you don't participate, right? So let's say we all agree, which I don't, that like there is a Christian choice and a non-Christian choice. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not.
Sure.
But like if you abstain from the process, the non-Christian choice wins, right? I just don't believe in Peter Parker politics that like, with great power comes great responsibility. I think that the inability to see what might come is enough to say, I'm going to hold back and I'm going to abstain from the process. So.
Yeah. Okay. I want to point this out because I said I would do this. I think that this isn't steel manning your position, but I will say this, that one of the things that is extremely frustrating about the voting process that we have is that the will of the voters are currently not represented, which I want to come back to this point, which is that in 2024 was the most consequential vote, certainly in my lifetime. So I do want to come back to that because there I think the votes really mattered because we actually had a candidate who offered us a real choice. Okay, and I might grab my laptop and try to find it, but there was a Princeton study that was done. Long story short, Princeton study is done, I think it was around 2000. And basically what this guy looked at is the popularity of an idea and how often it got, through the political process. So let's say there was something that was 100% popular. Like everyone agreed, yes, we should have a law that says do this. Government should do this. And there was another idea that was 0%. Nobody wanted it, And basically, he therefore would look at this idea, and he gauged their popularity from 0 to 100, And then he looked at the laws passed, okay? And in a normal world, you would have a graph, right, where that line goes at a 45-degree angle, right? Because as things are popular, they're more likely to get passed. As they're less popular, they're less likely to get passed. What he found was among the bottom 90% of wage earners, in terms of their popularity and what they thought, it was 30%. Didn't
What
matter.
was 30%? A straight line?
Yeah.
It was a straight line of what actually got passed. So if
Huh.
something was ubiquitously popular, it had a 30% chance of getting policy representation. If it was not popular by anyone, no one wanted it. No one was saying, we want this.
Yeah.
It had a 30% chance of.
Huh.
Now, how is that possible?
Lobbyists. Yeah.
Lobbyists.
Yeah.
So the 90%, the top 10% though, it's almost on the same graph, that 45-degree angle, where like what they want is what they get.
Yeah.
So yes. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't vote. So that brings me back to 2024, which is, have we really had a choice in our elections in, the last, since our country was taken over? And I would say,
What do you
no.
mean when you say our country was taken
Okay,
over?
well,
Well, to say there's no dime's worth of difference between like, George Bush and Al Gore, or like Mitt Romney and Obama, right? I mean, like when you say, have we really had?
Well,
I
right.
mean, there are marked difference between those two. I do want to go back to what you like. Lobbyist is such a fascinating conversation because the question is like, is it a honeypot, right? Does the power attract the lobbyists? Right? Or do the lobbyists keep feeding, or does it just snowball on itself, right? The lobbyists make the politicians more powerful, and the more power that politicians have, the more interested parties are to have them sway their political decisions one way or another, right? So I'm not a strict I never vote person. And, one president that I would have voted for would have been Ron Paul. And one of the coolest things about Ron Paul is that lobbyists just stopped knocking on his door because, and I quote, they had nothing to offer him that he wanted, which I think is really cool.
Like he couldn't be bought, basically,
Yeah,
sort of.
yeah.
Yeah. But go back. You said we had a, what did you didn't say fair election? What did you say? We haven't had a real.
I think Ken and I would probably agree that in many respects, we don't really live in a representative democracy anymore. That it is extremely hard for the desires of the people to be enacted, that there are, and this isn't deep state conspiracy, it's just a fact that, I would say this, the federal government as it exists today is far beyond its constitutional mandate. I mean, far beyond. And so therefore, there are entire banking regulatory systems, environmental regulatory systems, and all these agencies that, we're talking, this is what the DOJ is kind of about to a degrure.
Itching to talk to you about the Trump executive, but that's for White Pill Radio.
Yeah. So, basically, I think that, there have been, yes, was there a difference between Mitt Romney and Obama? I mean, I think at the time we thought so, but I think in retrospect, probably it would have turned out not really. I mean, Obama drone killed more people, including some American citizens. If Mitt Romney had done that, the left would have gone apoplectic. But since Obama
McCain certainly would have.
Yeah.
In the earlier, yeah.
So I mean, I think what happens is that we get all stoked up in November every 4 years, and we think it's good. We think it's, oh my gosh, the country's going to end if this person wins.
Yeah.
But what has happened in retrospect is, well, golly, the debt keeps piling up, the wars we keep fighting. There really doesn't seem to be that much difference. And by the way, remember how they hated George W. Bush when he was president? They love him now. They love him. Isn't that weird?
Well,
I think that's weird.
Well, I mean, he got almost unanimous support after 9/11. That dwindled throughout his first term, and then massively in his second term after the surge in Iraq. But no, he was the nation rallied after that. Yeah. But to say they hated him then and they love him now, and it's like, I don't know, it ebbed and flowed. But
I get. Well, among the media, I don't know. I kind of feel like they. My point is that
the media were begging him to send us to Afghanistan.
So I think that for the first time in our lifetimes, there is someone who, I mean, I know I'm going to sound in certain circles like a kind of dunce for saying this, but who is actually fighting, sort of deep state entrenched powers. Now, whether he will be effective, I don't know, because it's essentially a war of attrition at this point. Can he outlast, these bureaucratic
the cabal
that wants endless wars and wants endless deficit spending and so on and so forth,
wants to keep us sick and
and so the scariest thing is that his ear is so he's able to be pulled by the last person that talked to him, and this Iran thing where maybe we bomb Iran, maybe we don't, like the fact that he's able to be pulled back and forth by the deep state, and some of the I'm grateful that some in the deep state are pulling him the other way. You may not call that the deep state, but I mean,
that's happening. But
who talked him out of it, right?
Can you think of another example other than Iran where you feel like he's waffling back and forth between people that have his ear.
Well, I mean,
And I thought about making a joke about, he doesn't have a whole ear on one side, but
I wasn't even.
I thought that's actually where you're going with that.
Oh, no. Just meaning like he is at the whim of the.
Yeah.
He's at the whim of the last person that talked to him.
But
right?
give me an example other than Iran.
Okay, you mentioned the Houthis, right? On Tim Pool, he's talking to Tim about how dumb Biden is for bombing the Houthis, for blocking shipping lanes, and that's exactly what he did, right? Now, whether or not that's good policy or not is not my point.
Right.
My point is that, like, Biden's an idiot, he did this thing, and then he gets in office and does the same thing.
And it seems like Trump is malleable.
Extremely. To what I would say is the deep state. Right? I mean, he had freaking John Bolton for it. But anyways, this is not a debate about Trump. This is not a debate about Trump, right? This is a debate about like underlying principles of Christian participation.
Yeah. Well, at some point I do want to get to, maybe it's not now, but I do want to get to the thing that you guys bicker about the most, which is Ken complains about something or pokes fun or trolls about something.
Yes.
And Evan gets frustrated because he says, you don't get to complain if you didn't use your voice, use your vote.
Yeah,
I want to hear a little bit about
We've referred to it as the axiom, right? If you don't vote, don't complain. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I would say more to the point, it's not just that one complains. It's that one has the luxury of always being mad at everyone. No one is ever good enough. No one ever lives up to your standard.
Sure.
And so so here's the thing: when you kind of pick a side, if you will, you kind of take the wins and you got to take the losses.
Yeah.
That's life. That is mature political participation. And you kind of have to, you understand that when you come out and you take you want to be a persuasive person in the world. And so you make a case for a candidate or a policy that puts you in a position where other people can say, wait a minute, what about that time he said this on Hollywood Access or whatever? Or what about that time he said he was not going to bomb the Houthis and then he changed his mind? You have the luxury, it seems, of putting yourself in a position where you never liked anyone, you never throw your weight behind anybody, you don't believe in law or government. So, so that is a little bit frustrating.
Feels elitist
because it seems like if you do have Christian principles, where do you apply them? How do you apply them?
So let's talk about the different options that there are, right? There are, red and blue. There are libertarians and Green Party, right? Would you levy the same criticism at people that did vote for libertarian or green for throwing away their vote? And saying like, oh, you get to criticize the two-party system. How convenient. You're lobbing rocks from your safe little...
That's a great question.
Your safe little bunker where nothing ever gets done, right? Would you levy that same criticism?
No, I wouldn't level the same criticism, but it would be in the same family of criticism. I mean, I would say it's pragmatically stupid. So I mean, it's a losing. I at least appreciate that someone got out of bed, went to the poll, and put their used their right as a citizen to do that. And we all have a freedom of conscience, and they applied their Christian political principles or non-Christian principles in that way.
It's a bit of deviation. How do you feel about ranked choice voting?
Say that again?
Horrible.
Ranked choice voting.
Can you quickly tell listeners what that is?
So the two-party system is escalated by our primary system where, the more insanely radical people like Marjorie Taylor Greene get elected because, they either the person that was in, the normie that was in Congress before them drops out or they primary the person and it gets more and more radical, and same thing on the left, right? You have your Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you have your Jasmine Crockett's, right?
Yeah.
The polarization that happens by the primary system is something we all know, and we can't stand it. One alternative...
No, I like it.
Okay. One alternative is the ranked choice voting system, where you get to select your first choice, but since you, if you prefer libertarian principles, or if you prefer, like, Steve Bannonist principles in an I don't know,
populist
in a world where Trump doesn't exist. So maybe the 2028 election, unless you think he's going to run again.
Yeah, okay.
But anyways, in a 2028 election, right, who's going to run under that mantle that doesn't have the power? Well, if that's your primary political, I don't know the P word preference, you could put that as number one, but since you think it might be a losing, you could put a normie Republican or a normie Democrat as a number two, and then you could rank your choice voting so that even though your first one might be a pipe dream, your second one still has a chance.
This is what we do at Theology by the Pint. I'm serious. We rank vote for topics, and sometimes, in fact, we have one coming up where it won like by a landslide, but no one voted for it for number one.
In that scenario,
You know?
see, I am not a like the Christian.
And that's why we shouldn't do it.
I am not. I'm not a Christian shouldn't vote type of person. I might vote in a ranked choice voting scenario. Why don't you like it?
It is a deep state
Oh, boy.
operation
Okay.
Ploy to get
for
more-
real?
yeah, basically.
To get centrists elected.
It is pushed. I
Hmm.
mean, I'm kind of joking with the deep state, but it is definitely pushed by kind of pro-government actors. For example, look at the recent Senate election in Alaska. Okay, they don't have a. I guess they do a ranked choice in the primaries as well. I can't remember, but anyway, Lisa Murkowski is basically a universally hated senator from Alaska. Sarah Palin ran for Senate. She overwhelmingly won, and yet when the time in the primary, but when the time came for the general, Murkowski became an independent. And all the Democrats voted for her because they didn't like Sarah Palin. I can't remember how it worked, but it was a function of the ranked choice voting. And there are many Republican activists in Alaska trying to get rid of ranked choice voting for that matter. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but no, I don't like it. Here's the main problem: they made you. If you did not say 1, 2, 3, 4, then your vote didn't count.
Oh,
now, do you
wow.
think that is fair?
We don't do that theology by the pint. If you only put one vote in,
so
we
in other
count it.
words, if you really wanted Sarah Palin, and
then that's probably corrupted and probably by the two-party system, right? There's a reason after Ross Perot, got up there and did all of his math on the. There's a reason after Ross Perot, like the National Commission for Debate, whatever the Commission for Debates was, said, yeah, we're never doing that again, right? Because that was so unstable. It almost it's another example of an independent.
They should have done it after Woodrow Wilson, because Woodrow Wilson won in a plurality as well, because Teddy Roosevelt with the Bull Moose Party and all that. I mean, the conservatives won 60% of those votes or more. I think Wilson might have even been in the
well, when
high
you say
30s.
conservatives, it's because the conservatives split between two parties. Yeah.
But let's go back for a second, because he made his case about you have to take the wins and the losses with your guy.
Oh, sure.
But and then you asked him the question about libertarian or whatever. But what do you take about? I mean, what do you think about that idea that you don't? It's sort of a high horse position to be able to complain about everything you don't like when you haven't
I
put
think
skin in the game. You know?
accusing the person who never wins of being on the high horse is kind of rich, but I don't know. I do think it is.
But you could win. You could win. You could vote for the guy who won. You could win. You could vote for someone who has a prospect of winning.
Well, let's go back to the neo-Stalin and neo-Hitler, right?
No. I interrupted. I interrupted. I think you need to answer that question if you don't mind.
No, I really can't, right? Like, yes, I think it is the morally high position, but you think your positions are morally correct when you vote. Sure, you may not get everything you want in a candidate, even though it seems like you did.
No.
I'm kidding. One of the things we often inside baseball go back and forth on is that praise of Trump, criticism, and it's yeah, I don't like that. But then, more praise.
Well, yeah.
It's never unprompted criticism. It is one of my answers to the where you say you take the good with the bad, right? You back a candidate is one of the arguments that you're making. You back a candidate.
Or policy.
You get to praise the good. And you are condemned to accept their negatives. I mentioned the invasive species of the partisan, right? In the world of Trump, especially with all this recent tariff stuff, if this is an evergreen podcast, I'm sorry for talking about something that's happened in early 2025, but I'm seeing so many people defend the back and then the fourth and then the back again and then the fourth with zero criticism of what they once were against.
Well,
right?
and there's a lot of naivete going on there, or people, and I will say, if your idea coming into this is people shouldn't vote because most people don't really know what they're voting for, that's a different question. But you're not saying that.
Sure.
And so let's take out just for now and I don't know how many people it is, but the people that really don't know what they're doing, that go to the ballot box and they just pick because that's what social media told them to do. Let's just take them out for a second and say that everybody
I do
has
want to come back to
principles.
that. Yeah.
Let's do it. But in that case, do you think it's just as fair for somebody that doesn't vote to now lob complaints when they didn't have any skin in the game? I'm just pushing the question. I'm not taking a side. I'm asking.
Would I think the same about somebody that I radically disagree with, like a socialist, right? Do they have the right to complain about a system that doesn't offer them their opinion? They see Kamala Harris as bought and paid for by, Wall Street. They saw Hillary Clinton as bought and paid for by Wall Street. Do I think that their complaints are illegitimate because they chose to sat it out? No, I don't think so.
Right? Okay. Well,
so
that's your answer, yeah.
It's not just saying like, oh, only people that like me have the moral high ground and we get to have the defense of not getting what we want. So yeah, just the people not getting what they want are the ones on the moral high horse. Seems, I don't know. It seems kind of weird.
It's not about getting what you want. It's about having integrity in a process where you defend. See, I'm a builder. I like to think that in my life I build things. Like I'm like whatever it is I'm doing, whether it's the church, whether it's my children, whether it's my
Literally
home,
building this table.
You know, not this one, but
Oh,
you know,
most of the tables,
but I mean, like that. I think that's part of Christian stewardship. I think that's part of dominion. Like I want to make the world a better place. I have a positive. You know, there are positive goals that I'm sort of working towards, right? And I mean, I think you're also making the world a better place. I'm not saying that you're not, but to be a builder, you know, if you will, you know, or a restorer of old things, sometimes you know, there's a kind of framework that you have to push forward. You have to manifest it in apparatuses, whatever the plural is.
You
of
were
that.
right, apparatus.
You know, so I don't know how you do that if you're not willing to say, so this is where I stand, this is my point of view, and this is where I'm going to enact it. I don't only enact it in voting.
Sure. What about the states with the none of the above options, right?
Wait, I do want to. I do want to ask this though. On the ranked choice voting. Okay, I just want to ask this very clearly because I think we agree on this. In Alaska, they forced people to rank all the candidates.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. If you don't.
Okay.
Like, yeah, if it doesn't count,
Okay.
if you only
because that's like actually
if you
opposed
only
to
put
democracy,
one,
right?
Yeah, yeah. If you only put one, throw it in the ballot, and then walk away. Yeah, no,
they
I
didn't
agree.
count that ballot.
Sure, that's ridiculous.
That's why ranked choice voting is a tool.
And I would argue
that gets normies elected and takes out the Sarah Palins of the world. Now you might think Sarah Palin's a crank. I think she's amazing.
That's a bad example of ranked
That's
choice
how they
voting.
do it.
That's how they did it once.
Well, that's how they are pushing it, and they are
so
selling
what
it.
What I'm going to ask you is about another method, which isn't exactly ranked choice voting, but like a none of the above option, right? I think
France does that.
Yeah, I think Maine has it or something.
Wait. So like you go to the ballot box and you vote for your like railroad commissioner or whatever, but then when it comes to president, you can choose none of the above. Right. Isn't that what you do when you just skip that one?
Is it, Evan? Is it what you do if you just skip, or are you?
Because I skip some people if I don't know anything about them.
Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Isn't it? I mean, if there's 10 people there and you don't vote for any of them.
Well, I mean,
are you saying that in the results, when the ticker at the bottom of your screen that night, it says none of the above and it has 0.1%?
Sure. There's like the people that like.
I don't know what the value is of that, but okay.
I mean, isn't it a more vocal way of saying like I don't agree with these policies?
Sure.
Than to lump those people in with the people that sit it out.
Just too lazy to vote.
Exactly. Right. I would,
yes.
I do want to get to that.
Yeah.
So we'll answer this and we'll talk about low information voters in a minute. Yeah.
Well,
sounds like we're on the same page about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I actually think fewer people probably should vote. Yeah. So that's a whole other conversation.
Square that with populism.
I think voting is not a right. I think voting is a privilege of responsible citizenship. I think you should understand what democracy. I think you should understand some basic things about civics, about your American government. You should know some basic things about the world in which you live. So I know people are going to say poll tax and literacy test. I mean. It's not unreasonable to say.
The Democrats ruined those things for us, right? I don't necessarily think those are unreasonable either.
Yeah.
But the
net taxpayer, possibly property owner, I think those all are things that should be considered.
I think when you start getting into the math, that gets really tricky.
I agree because you use a road and you pay the gas tax and
I rented for the last 15 years and I'm glad I was able to vote.
Yeah.
So.
What do you mean? Like, do you think your landlord just ate their tax out of the kindness of their heart, or do you think they passed it on to you?
I understand.
Yeah.
That's more dubious, but I would rather us have
what do you
that
mean,
debate.
Net taxpayers? Like,
well, I would say you have a W-2,
and how would you even calculate? But again, with her property tax
I get
scenario,
that it's complicated, but it could be done.
Well,
we could say the government does it when you do your taxes.
So back in Texas A&M, I wrote an article for the Eagle, the College Station newspaper. It never got published, but it was called the tax you know (parentheses) is better than the tax you don't. Right? Yes, I'm calling taxes the devil.
I openly advocated from the pulpit yesterday for an end to property taxes. So.
In which I argued that, like, same thing where you're talking about renting. People that rent think that they don't pay property.
Right.
The landlord doesn't, like, same thing with corporate taxes.
I mean, probably
right? Stuff you buy from the store.
That was not my point. My point was...
Sure.
Okay.
But to answer his point,
Yes.
right, the net the net taxpayers, it's like, it's so insanely complicated because corporate taxes, corporations don't, like, just keep that out of the kindness of their...
I get that.
Like, they don't just eat that cost.
Yeah.
They pass it on to the
Yes.
consumer, right? Every tax gets passed on.
Okay, there's an easier way to solve this then, which is that you have a flat tax that everybody has to pay. So that would solve that problem. Then everyone...
I'm not an abolitionist. I'm an incrementalist, and I would love that. And if Ron Paul was running, I'd vote for that.
Yeah.
There we go.
Or Herman Cain's 999.
The postal card, right? That you can fit it on a postcard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The tax receipt. Yeah. I mean, so I think... So those are kind of structural problems. So I mean, again,
Sure.
Going back to the 30% thing, there are structural problems in that we're not represented. There are structural problems that I think we have very little say. That even the people that we elect basically can't change the government. I mean, like, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who you think is such a... I don't know what you think, but anyway,
She's a little wacky.
She went and tried to visit the J6 prisoners, and they said no. I think that's kind of insane, as an example.
Especially considering you go down to El Salvador and have wine with a known
and
terrorist.
I also think it's kind of insane that, like, Enrique Tarrio and, like, Dominic Pizzola and all of them are out, right? I do not think every violent person there was a Fed, right?
Enrique Tarrio was not there, right?
No, but he was arrested for conspiracy. And White Pill Radio.
I don't want to talk J6.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, yes, I think it's insane that she wasn't allowed to see the J6 people. I also think it's insane, to put the shoe on the other foot, that every single one of them was released, even all the violent nut jobs that were there.
Yeah. My point is that even people that are elected, they get involved in the process and they're like, whoa, this is dark here. There's something like, I can't even access this building. I can't, and I
think that's because
I do think a lot of them end up getting blackmailed. I think a lot of them end up, scared. I think a lot of them get rich in the process. I mean, I think that
they're
should
jaded
be obvious.
somehow.
So it's a very political, it's a very compromised process. And yet, again, so is my neighborhood Little League. So what do I do? Do I opt out? We've aged out now, but you have to fight for the process you want. You have to fight for the world that you want. And that's the point. And you have to be willing to engage in the process.
But your neighborhood Little League doesn't have any effect on me, right? The national government does. So like
all the more reason.
And that's where I think that all the more reason to complain, right? Like
you have no credibility.
So for example, I wanted to talk about some other institutions that I don't participate in by choice that I can still complain about, right? I don't go to a Catholic church, right? I could, if I wanted to, I could participate in that, change the system from the ground up. Like, I still get to complain when a priest gets moved around because he was, messing with little kids, right? There's tons of systems that we participate in or choose not to participate in, and our complaints don't really matter one way or another. Whether we could affect change or not, we can still point at evil and call it evil. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Ken.
Yeah,
but
so why don't you go to a Catholic church? It's a rhetorical question, meaning you are voting in that situation. You don't go to a Catholic church.
That is the vote.
Yeah, that's why I abstain from voting, right? I do not want to be associated with the...
That's his vote, that he doesn't vote, is what he's saying.
Okay, so let me, then.
And I think coming on a program like this and talking about, like, why that is actually a politically motivated opinion rather than the people that just sit around on, election day and it's like, oh, that was today? Like, that's why I think it matters. Finish your thought. I do want to talk about low information voters and low information non-voters.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I still am not 100% clear. Because you're not putting forth a positive statement as to why Christians should not vote. You're simply saying they can't vote. So we essentially agree on the proposition.
Don't have to.
Hold on.
They may abstain.
They may choose to abstain.
Yeah,
the Christian should not vote. It's like a Christadelphian argument.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. They may abstain, but they shouldn't.
But also, then they shouldn't complain.
Yeah. They shouldn't abstain. They might. I mean, all things are lawful, but not all things are good. So it's lawful for you.
I think it is. I think it is. Well, okay, perfect.
Wait, let me ask. This is what I was going to ask. Do you not vote because it's a stain on your conscience when people that you vote for do bad things?
Just like you have a limiting principle going one way, I do on another, right? There is some degree of evil that I would be willing to tolerate, right? It's just you and I totally disagree on a matter of degree, right?
Yeah.
Is it a stain on your conscience? Like, yeah, if Ron Paul had turned out to just like in 2008, had he won, just bomb every country in the Middle East, I'd be like, oh shoot, dang it, like you pulled
Yeah,
the
Okay,
bull
that's
out.
on me.
so
You know what I
basically,
mean? But like there is, yeah,
so
there's
shy of Ron Paul, there's
Sure.
no one that you could imagine ever voting for.
Not in the current like political system, right? I mean, yeah, I didn't even like the libertarians for the last 3 elections.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Okay.
I want a smaller government because, like you were saying about the rooms that people can't access, the
So let's
institutions that people aren't allowed to visit. I think the government's way too big, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's an example where you have a congressman that's supposed to be able to enact change, and there are parts of the government that they can't even see, let alone touch, right? I think this just means
Right.
the federal government's
Okay.
way too big.
So let's say that it's 2028 and Donald Trump has cut the federal government by 10%. Not, great. Let's say we're a $500 billion away from a balanced budget every year. And, I don't know, 100 agencies have been eliminated and 100,000 federal workers and, I mean, won't I then be justified in saying, well, I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got 10% reduction in the federal government. We're on a path to a balanced budget. His successor, or if he runs again,
Stop.
I don't think he's going to stop.
could put us on a path. And, I'm hopeful for America again. I'm actually hopeful that we can be a free country again. I'm hopeful that people can, have big families again. I'm hopeful that people can be property owners again.
What's the question?
Well, no.
Right.
My answer to that is, well, what does the other 90% do, right? If we cut 10%.
Oh my gosh, you're never happy.
Not never happy, but like
Rarely.
No,
happy.
literally.
Well, hold on,
I'm
hold on.
sitting here saying.
So here's a hypothetical back. I was involved in the pro-life community.
Wouldn't I be justified though if we got after 4 years a 10% cut in federal government? You're saying you want government smaller. I'm saying this guy said he would do it.
No,
What if
that's
he
not what I
doesn't?
said. I said, what is it that 90% is doing, right?
Okay.
So this is a hypothetical back in my Texas Right for Life days in College Station that I would ask people, right? Because the pro-life movement is so like connected to the Republican Party.
Yeah.
I would ask people like a staunchly pro-choice Republican versus a Bernie Sanders pro-lifer, right? What do you like? The size and scope of government will grow, but like if it grows as a single issue voter, right? I would ask people to like talk about their moral imperatives. I don't necessarily care that much about like food stamps. It's such a small percentage of our national budget, right? I'm more concerned with like the war and the national debt that like you're robbing people to pay, the interest on tomorrow's debt, right? I'm so concerned about that, and I'm so not concerned about like food stamps.
Okay,
or
so you've poked
yeah.
fun of me for being a Steve Bannon fan. Do you know that Steve Bannon has basically called for the Department of Defense to have its budget reduced by half?
I mean, that's great.
Okay.
But Trump just bragged about the first $1 trillion defense budget.
Yeah. Well, yes.
You see what I mean?
He's taking his L's like he said he would.
Yes. Yes. Again, yeah. I'm taking my lumps. But there are people in the president's. Who are the people? On
I don't want this to be about Trump.
Who are the people on the other side that have advocated for a reduction in the Department of Defense by half?
Not Trump.
That's
my point, right?
I
I didn't have anyone in this last election.
No, I'm saying on the left, who are the people that have advocated that the Department of Defense, their budget needs to be reduced by half?
Well, left and Democrats are two different things.
Okay,
right?
so
you go far enough left.
You pick them.
You go well. No,
Who?
you go far enough left. You get against like American imperialism.
What
Still,
mainstream?
I don't have a
person
mainstream. Like my people aren't mainstream.
Okay,
right?
then you'll have no influence. Congratulations.
If you say so, right?
I mean, the people listening get to decide.
One of the things that we said on the group chat was like, yeah, for the first 300 years of like Christian history, like we didn't have influence, right? We still got to complain about being fed to lions, right?
Yeah, but don't you want to have dominion? Don't you want to? Do you think the Genesis mandate to have dominion? Do you think that still applies?
I mean, like it depends on what you do with that dominion. The tax collector, that was like the Jewish citizen of Rome, right? That's collecting taxes from his fellow Jews. He has dominion, right?
Okay.
He's exercising dominion.
You literally
but not for a good thing.
You literally just said,
okay,
the things I'm concerned about are war. I said there's a guy who is the thought leader in the populist nationalist movement, which is the strain of the Republican Party that has all the power right now and influence, and just got a guy elected in the biggest landslide since 1980 or 84. And I literally said, there is a thought leader who is reducing the Department of Defense by half, and you were like, whatever.
Well,
Which is it? Do you want a reduction
because
eventually in the war?
Steve Bannon wasn't on the ticket, right? You listen to 4 hours of the War Room like every week, but like I could point a dozen other people. You may say they're wrong, and say Elon Musk is the person that was actually like pulling Trump's ears this way instead of Steve Bannon, who's pulling it this way, right? Like the point is neither Musk nor Bannon were on the ticket.
But did one side get you closer? I mean, this is about.
I don't want to talk about Trump though. Like,
but that's I think
fine.
he's talking in principles.
I mean, but you understand how over 10 windows work. You understand how paradigm shifts work. Do you want to make progress in the direction that you want to go, or do you just want to sit back and complain?
Well, and again, I don't want to talk about tariffs because that's not what this is about. But like,
I didn't bring tariffs up. I'm asking about war. You said war is
okay. The war thing. Well, I mean, yes, it would be great if Trump was listening to Bannon instead of like Pete Hegseth on the $1 trillion like.
Okay, let me ask it this way. What if you had a $1 trillion defense budget that in 4 years you could preserve the Panama Canal, you could preserve the Greenland trade route, and you could build an Iron Dome, which would basically seal off the Western Hemisphere. And then once that was complete, which is I think the ultimate goal here, you could basically protect America and the West from outside influences. And you could reduce the Department of Defense budget down to $400 billion a year.
And hindsight's 2020. If in the future,
yes, but this
I
is
could
the
see
point.
that had happened. Hold on. If in the future that I could see that had happened, right? I would say, okay, I guess I was wrong. I should have.
Yeah.
Had a hand in that. However, at what cost does it come? I don't know. But if I could see both branches of the timeline where. Who would it be in 2028? I don't know. Whoever the Democrat in 2028 is, and whoever the Republican is in whoever the Republican is in 2028, and see that leads to more foreign wars, and this one leads to less, right? I'm just saying we don't have the benefit of hindsight. We never do. And what if you accidentally elect a George Bush who ran on anti-war, or you accidentally elect a Barack Obama who ran on anti-war, right? And you still get John McCain. You know what I mean?
Yes, like, you most definitely. We none of us here are prophets or sons of prophets.
That's what I'm saying.
So you participate in the process to exert your will. That's why you do it. It's the easiest way to do it. Yeah, you have to choose. You have to make a choice. You have to put your weight behind one person or one party over another.
Ken doesn't.
And I really want to talk about the voter thing, but
one has to
exercise your will, right? This is stolen from Pingelette, who's an insane hedonist atheist, but like I kind of love him. He had an example of like, if you had a gun in your hand, would you use that gun to stop a murder or a rape? Like, yeah, probably. Like, would you use that gun to build a library? Well, libraries are good, right? So there's two ends of the spectrum on what you use that power to do, right? But at the end of the day, it's all like at the point of a gun. You're exercising. It's not just a bunch of people getting together and decide, hey, let's all do something together. It's pointing the gun at the people that said no and saying, well, you're going to do it anyways, right?
Okay.
So it
Are
is.
You suggesting that Trump is building libraries by forcing slaves to build bricks with guns? I don't know what you're saying.
No, what I'm saying is that every tax is at the point of a gun, because if I do want to trade with, my friend in Mexico, and I don't think the government has any say in it, right? They will either come, garnish my wages, or if I refuse to give that to them, they will point a gun at me and throw me in jail.
So you want to see a reduction in taxes? Or the
this is a trap.
It's not a trap, because tariffs are taxes, but of course, but like at what cost?
I'm just asking a yes or no question.
Sure.
Do you want to see a reduction or an elimination of taxes?
Yes, I don't think Trump will do that.
It's irrelevant. It's about building movements. It's about building ideas. It's about working the system that has been hijacked. We would probably agree on that, to get to that place. I mean, no one has taken more taxes off the table than Donald Trump. He, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. To the point where, like, I don't know how he's going to pay for it, nor do I really care.
That's the point. Well, hold on. You know exactly how he's going to pay for it, right?
With the tariffs?
You got to sell treasury bills. Again, I don't want to talk about Trump or tariffs or treasury bills, but hey, 3 T's. But like, Yeah, you pay for it with treasury bills.
Yeah.
And then interest on those treasury
But-
bills
but-
starts
but-
accumulating until interest on our national debt becomes greater than like Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security, which have been for the last like decade the main drivers of our spending.
But what I'm saying is that you say that there are these things that are sort of goods, like moral goods.
Go back to the
but
abortion
you have
thing.
you have no way of impacting your will to achieve those things.
Well, my pro-life Bernie Sanders versus pro-choice.
Whoever you got,
no,
two
but like,
choices.
but see that
You're looking there. There's no magical candidate that has this, and this. Like what about the Bernie Sanders pro-life? That's a unicorn.
No, I mean so was Trump, right? Trump was a unicorn.
No, Trump spoke for the people. That's how he won.
Well, what I'm saying is like Republicans had been
But are you
free
asking-
markets up until.
Are you asking the Bernie Sanders question to like make another point? Because if so, I would
Well,
be curious, Evans.
Well, I'm very curious because I do
What is the
think
question?
the world exists in trade-offs,
a
right?
pro-life Democrat
A
or
pro-life
a pro-choice.
social. No, not just Democrat.
Oh, not just any
socialist. Maybe even a
I see what you're
pro-life
saying.
socialist warmonger
Yeah.
versus a.
Is that
a
issue
pro-
important enough to?
Everything has trade-offs.
What would you do in that situation? Would you abstain from voting?
It's a good question.
That's why I ask it.
Yeah.
Or are there principles that are so
What are the choices again?
So, like,
a pro-life warmonger.
a pro-life socialist warmonger versus a pro-choice Bannon, right?
Yeah.
A Bannon that's like radical all 9
It
months.
kind of was Trump a
your
little bit.
dream,
it's
whoever
pretty-
your dream
yeah.
person is, right?
Yeah.
Because I would say a normal Republican that likes free markets and is like, oh, well, that doesn't exist anymore. But like your dream candidate, but like all 9 months pro-choice versus Bernie freaking Sanders and John McCain had a love child, but they're pro-life.
Yeah. So give me an example of such a candidate.
No, that it's a hypothetical, so he
Yeah.
can make
And-
his
and
solid
I'm saying-
point.
But it's an impossible hypothetical because the
But
world.
you do that with him, so I'm
Have I?
curious. Yeah.
When?
Every one of your Trump hypotheticals of, well, maybe
Well-
he'll cut taxes. Maybe he'll.
But would that be a
maybe-
situation-
No. I am saying that
Sure.
Trump has literally campaigned on cutting certain taxes, and he has thrown out the possibility.
I
Of
think
ending
inflation
the
is a
income
tax.
Let me finish my thought.
Sorry.
He has thrown out the possibility of eliminating the income tax in time. I mean, that's his whole goal with, I think, the tariffs. So, I mean, did Hillary Clinton ever throw out the possibility of ending the income tax? Did she? He is an Overton window mover. That is my point. He is throwing out cannons, left and right. He is moving the narrative arc to say, let's get here, let's get here, let's get here. He keeps moving it, and for that, I think he should be given some credit.
Okay,
and
but
so-
in that situation,
talk about Trump,
wait,
but okay.
hold on. In that situation,
Okay,
wait. Two things I want to say. First,
Yeah.
you keep saying you don't want to talk
Sure,
about
sure,
Trump
sure.
and tariffs, but this is the zeitgeist we're in. Right? I mean, this is the
I
situation
get
we're
it.
in.
I
So
get
they're
it.
going to be the exemplars for this conversation
sure.
because he is our current president. And I would love to hear you answer the hypothetical because it kind of gets at what he's saying in his overall idea about there are times to
Trade-offs.
abstain.
And times
Would you
yeah.
abstain from voting then?
No, I don't think I would abstain from voting. I think
You'd pick the
Trump
lesser
is
of two.
largely
Wait.
Trump is a pro-choice, for the most part, candidate who offered the other things. Didn't he?
So you would vote for?
Well, I voted for a candidate
Yeah.
who is not as pro-life as I would want.
Well, I mean, but the other candidate wasn't pro-life at all, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying you have a pro-life Bernie Sanders or a pro-choice.
Yeah,
Steve Bannon.
there's a reason that pro-choice people favor government. It's a cohesive worldview. There's a reason that abortion is the sort of glue that holds the right together. It's because they have a political framework that begins with the protection of life and an understanding of the human being that goes on to defending property, that goes on to defending one's rights as a free person. They work harmoniously. So you're asking me, would I vote for a person that will never advocate a platform? I mean, I don't know what I would do. I'd probably go with a pro-life person and take my chances with the socialism. But
You
that
got
person,
your hypothetical
but that
answered.
person won't exist because socialists don't value human life. That's why they're socialists.
And your credulity around all of the wonderful things that Trump will do, I think, don't exist. So, like, that, yeah,
No,
we both agree.
So what? Do you think it's?
But
unre-
I
No, let me
understand
ask
your
this.
point
Do you
about the
think it's-
Overton window, right? I understand your point.
But do you think it's unreasonable to think it could be possible that in 2028, I realize that in 2025 it looks unlikely, but in 2028 the federal government could be reduced by 10%. That was my example. That's not a crazy hypothetical.
Adjusted for inflation, and that's all the question, right? Because the more
You never answer my question.
no, I'm asking.
That's not a crazy hypothetical.
Adjusted for inflation,
Yeah.
right? 10% or 10% as a dollar amount, right?
10% from what it is right now.
As a dollar amount, and we don't have any inflation. Yes, that would be a net good, right? Especially if that 10%
answered.
By the way, it
came
wouldn't be enough.
entirely from the defense. I'm not, and one thing that I'm saying, let me be absolutely clear. I'm not saying that neither candidate is better than the other, right? I'll say it right now. I do think Trump, for as much criticism as I give him, is a better candidate. Or not candidate. One can talk about politics all day long, and
better than Kamala.
Has better policies than Kamala, right?
Yeah, that's nice to hear.
Of course, I'm not saying it's all the same,
Right?
And I've never said that.
No,
right?
you haven't. You haven't.
I make quippy things about no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain, right? As a joke to say, like, neither one fits my underlying qualification of, hey, are they qualified to, hold the nuclear codes? Are they qualified to be the commander in chief? Yeah,
that's fair. Okay, let's get to this low info voters and non-voters. Any thoughts? You said you wanted to talk about that.
Which is more dangerous? A
low information or a non-information?
No, a low information
like the
voter?
kind of person that doesn't know anything about politics and they sit on social media all day.
A low information voter?
Yeah.
Or a low information non-voter, right?
Which is more dangerous?
Which is more dangerous?
I have my thoughts, but I'm just supposed to be the moderator.
A low information voter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? But you already laid your cards on the table earlier.
That's a totally moot point. That has nothing to do with anything I've said.
Well, no, you laid your cards on the table earlier saying you wish less people would vote.
No, that's what I
said.
What
fewer.
What I would.
I'm sorry. Sam.
What I want is a robust participation in the political process. I want everyone to have some skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I actually want them to. They have skin in the game because they pay confiscatory taxes all the time, and yet they don't use that skin in the game to get involved and know what's going on. So yes, low information voters, or I would say what often happens is that people will vote for what benefits them. The old joke about democracy is two, wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner.
Yeah.
So it's an imprecise, flawed model.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a better one, and I'm all ears. I would say that we should repeal the 17th Amendment. We should go back to states electing senators. That would be great. That's how they framed it. Should have been done that way. Shouldn't be a popular vote to elect senators. And I think that the reason that, yes, I know people are going to say white males, blah, 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 whatever. Property owners, I think the framers understood that if you're not invested in the community in which you live in a visceral way, then you don't get to tell other people how you don't get to leech off of them for their benefit. So,
man, you and I totally disagree on like what investing in a community looks like.
Do we?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
really? How well do you know me?
Well, go back to, you said property owners, right? And go back to what I said about taxes. How everyone now is invested in the system, right? Everyone,
whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not.
I just acknowledged that.
Yeah.
I said they pay confiscatory taxes.
But not just W-2 people.
So it's absurd that they're low information.
Everybody.
Well, hold on. Not just W-2 people, right? Not just W-2 property owners.
That.
Okay, gotcha. Just want to make sure.
40 to 50% of our income goes to taxes. When you figure out the gas tax, when you figure out the sales tax,
Sure.
I got it. Okay. I mean, I'm with you. I don't believe in taxes. I'd be happier with tariffs.
This is such a beautiful friendship forming. No, they're already friends.
And I think tariffs are taxes, but okay.
Okay, so
sure.
But was there a point about the low information voter that you think
I think
kind
low
of
information
impacts
voters
your-
are like a lot more dangerous, right? I would actually like to encourage people to, like, if you aren't...
I mean, this is all the more reason that you should be voting. Because
you are informed.
Because you actually are informed. And so you're literally being outvoted by people who do not know how many branches of government there are. And you're allowing that to happen.
On which side? Because I can point to a ton of red hats people that don't know. You know what I mean?
Yes, but as long as you don't participate, you're letting yourself lose the game.
Because I think that
you're forfeiting the game.
Because I think they're dangerous too, right?
So outvote them.
I don't have a dog in this fight.
Build a movement.
Even though I think like two dangerous options, right? One might be better than another one.
Have
right?
you ever? Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You get my point.
Have you ever tried to build a political coalition? Have you ever tried to build a movement?
No.
Have you ever spent your own money and time to say, this is what I value, join me, I want to have a collective voice, I want to have a collective will to make this world better?
By doing what? By organizing together and building something? I love building things, right?
I didn't say it only is through voting.
No, but like through what kind of a process, right? Through...
Well, in this case, it's voting.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's my problem. Is like, you mentioned confiscatory, you're mentioning like all of the terrible things that like warmongers do. You mentioned the whatever.
The fact that our government was couped in 1963.
All of the things that like are happening at the point of a gun, right? I say like, how many of those things can we do without that gun, right? Social Security, for example, right? Everyone talks about, like, everyone who runs on Social Security talks about how popular it is, right? How this program's so popular. It's like, well, then why does, like, if it's so popular, then why wouldn't people fund it voluntarily, right? Why don't you remove the program and let's see how popular it is, right?
Sure.
Give people a voluntary option to invest in
Their future. Yeah.
Right. And if so what I'm saying is like at the point of a gun is where you and I are going to like separate part ways.
No, I don't believe in the government making people do things by the force of a gun either. What I'm saying is that the situation in which we find ourselves now, if we wanted to reduce the power of the gun, we would build movements and coalitions to enact our will in a perfect world, which is the only world in which we can operate, is work towards our ideals. Then you elect someone who is better at moving the Overton window and getting you closer to your goals. That's my modest proposal, that we do that.
And what if I vote wrong, Evan? You know, like
okay.
What about our Christian friends, right? Because I didn't want this to devolve into how should the Christian vote, but like the whole middle part of this podcast has, right? What about our Christian friends that vote Democrat, right? That vote wrong, right? Yeah. Surely you think that
I think they should vote. Yeah, and I think that
that was a great question.
Yeah, I think that churches should. But you said something in your, maybe you said it in your remarks, how partisanship has infected everything.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a book. It's about the breakup of the Missouri Synod, or the controversies in the Missouri Synod. But it talks
That's Lutherans.
Yeah, it talks about how in the 1950s, half of your church would be Democrat, half would be Republican, and the only real difference would be that the half that were Democrat were like pro-trade unions. But they all agreed on the life question. They all agreed on the marriage question. They all agreed on the taxation question. They all agreed on, World War II was, we killed Nazis. That was a good thing.
JFK would look like a conservative now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yes, the times have changed. Now, what changed that? Well, the cultural wars changed it. Mm-hmm. Abortion changed it. Homosexuality changed it. The national debt, I would argue, in many ways has changed it. The coup of our government has changed it. I mean, we don't have representative government anymore. I agree with that. And that's a real problem. So yes, churches are now divided along partisan lines. It's a fact of life. It's inescapable because there are certain moral points of view that the culture, the world, is demanding we have a say on.
In a national government, right, is so big that it's gonna fracture. It's so much easier to have these conversations in smaller and smaller communities. A state government doing one thing or another is going to have, or even a national government the size of Texas, right? It's going to be so much easier and so much less influential than telling somebody in like Texas that somebody in California has to do exactly what you want them to do, or telling somebody in California that somebody in Texas, right, you're going to do whatever they want you to do, right? It doesn't make sense for this whole thing to it. We talked about this in our Christian nationalism, to which I asked, well, why not Christian globalism, right? If your goal is to
have dominion,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely,
Christian globalism,
absolutely. What other kind of globalism is there? I'm not joking. Do you believe in dominion? Do you believe Christians have a dominion mandate?
I really want to define dominion because I think you and I are going to define it in a lot of different ways.
How does God define it?
Right, and just
to subdue the earth?
Gardening. Yeah, you know what I mean?
To what? Gardening?
Yeah,
Oh
like I don't think it's like
gardening. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't think it's instituting a Federal Reserve, and neither do you. But like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I definitely don't think it's like you people in Babel like build a tower to heavens and have dominion over the earth, right? I think it's like you in your garden have dominion over and you in your garden have dominion over the earth, right? And don't use the sword to exercise political power over another.
I had a professor in seminary talk about and it was kind of a silly example, one of the ways that we exact dominion over the earth is killing mosquitoes. Like the truck that goes around and kills the mosquitoes in your neighborhood. But
Evan, what is DDT?
Huh?
Evan, what is DDT?
I don't even know what that
He
is.
smiled.
Okay.
He smiled.
It's the cause of polio.
Oh, boy.
Keep going.
It's the cause. Did you hear me? I said it was the cause of polio.
But Ken brought up JFK. So, up is down, left is right. This is crazy. My point is you garden in your garden, your neighbor gardens in their garden. But at some point you decide that you're going to, as as a neighborhood, you're going to pay somebody to come kill the mosquitoes.
Mhm.
How far out does that go? Because that's taking dominion collectively.
The tragedy of the commons, right? The whole like if lots of people get together and decide to do something, what do you do with the holdouts, right?
Sure. I was just saying
Well, meaning
dominion
like
is more than just you in your garden.
meaning like when you have
Maybe.
10 people, right, and you want to build a big garden in the middle, and what happens when that like ninth person says no?
They
I'm
don't
gonna-
get
I'm gonna
zucchini
keep my eye
when
on,
it comes
right?
time. Yeah.
And I'm much happier dealing with that on smaller scales
Yeah.
than I am on a national scale. What
I'm only
happens to
asking
the
about-
national holdouts?
Because the question was
Yeah.
about dominion, and you made it very personal, like me and my wife, and then you and your
Sure.
person. But
I
at
have
some
more
point,
and more
dominion has to be
aversion.
more than that, right?
Yeah.
I have more and more aversion the larger that grows.
Sure.
Right?
I mean,
Okay.
I would agree that, like, in our government, dominion shouldn't be exercised by law. I would want it to happen organically. I want to have a free country. But you did answer my second framing question of the whole night, which is the law good? And you said, don't use the sword. Well, no, there are times to use the sword. Now, there aren't times to use a sword to make the ninth guy participate with the community garden, but there is a time to use a sword, when that guy murders someone.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have law. I would argue there has to be law. Law is instituted from, the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, after the sin, after the fall into sin, you have to have law.
Yeah.
You have to have money, by the way,
But
because it's a sinful world. I mean, everything we're debating
there's
is
a law
gone
before
in
sin.
heaven. We don't need money in heaven. We don't need, whatever. We don't need
streets
law.
are paved with gold.
The streets are paved with gold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I would say you said don't use the sword. I mean, well, again,
To do what?
right.
Right. Would
Yeah.
and again, the Pendulette thing, would you use a gun to stop a murder versus would you use a gun to build a library?
Yeah.
Right. There's a entire spectrum. And then you and I would
I want to make
sure. Go ahead.
one more point, and then I think I'm out of things to say. But there is a brewing scandal at a major mega church in Houston. I'm not going to mention it,
I
but the
don't know
Chronicle
this.
did a big article about it. Long story short, members are suing
yes.
because there was a meeting where 200 of the 94,000 members showed up, and there was a change in the bylaws.
A sort of secretive change.
Allegedly, this change gave the senior pastor sort of full right over the whole church,
Mm-hmm.
over the whole church. And members, this is my point, members lost the ability to vote. They can't see the books, supposedly. They can't vote on the budget. They can't call the next pastor. They can't get the pastor out. It's like a fiefdom, okay?
Mhm.
It's probably worse than any fiefdom you've ever imagined. You think those members should have a vote,
A voice.
right?
Yeah, I'm fine with voting in things that you're voluntarily, and I think that's bad, right? That like I'm not just an government person, right? If your company town, right, does something bad, right? Like, yeah, it got too big.
Company town?
When a
Like
company
Hershey, Pennsylvania?
or I'm thinking of like gold mining or gold mines where like
Okay.
one company would go in, set up a company town, and everyone
Oh,
basically
okay.
followed the rules of whatever the company dictated.
Okay.
Or an institution like a church, right? I
Yeah.
think when cancer grows, it metastasizes and it gets
Mm-hmm.
like too big to manage, right? I think that happens in churches. I think that happens
Okay,
in
but like at your-
corporations. I
but
think that
like
happens in governments.
But at your church, you're probably pretty active.
Sure. But like,
Do you have votes on things?
not really.
Because it's run by a dictator, or because you just never need to decide on the budget, or
I am genuinely curious about that too.
Because I'll put my cards on the table. I don't tithe to my church, right? I tithe to
I don't care.
I tithe to the charities that my church does,
Mhm.
that my church tithes to, right? And I basically skip the middleman because my church is ecclesia. I think the church is too big, right? I even think.
Well, I have a great one if you want to go to a small one. A really small one. Okay. No, but my even at the church level, my point is that, well, how do we decide things?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
We have a meeting, we present the budget, we interview the potential pastor, and
Yeah.
we vote.
And
Or in our case, we left the ELCA in 2011.
And I think you
with 2
can
votes.
participate in community, and choose to. And the wonderful thing about the church system is they don't point a gun at you and take your money, right? They
Yeah.
they pass a plate around, and it's voluntary. I love voluntary
I'm for
stuff.
as little guns
yeah.
as possible, but
Even
sometimes
voluntary
necessary.
stuff can be corrupted, right? But the wonderful
course,
thing,
like
but
the
the
Little
wonderful thing is, right? You don't have to keep contributing to that. You can argue for better versions of voluntary communities and worse versions, right? This church is an example of a worse version.
Yeah.
But guess what, right? You don't have to pay the money that this church is
Yeah.
collecting. Yeah.
That's interesting that your mind went right to the money, because the question was, do you vote? Like, does your church ever hold votes for like approving a budget or like, a new
Vote with your
pastor coming
dollars,
in?
right? I mean, that's what
Or
all
do we want the
boycott
red
people say.
carpet or the blue carpet?
I mean,
They're more of like a concrete floor kind of church.
I know.
yeah, I like the dial, right? Do you want your church to be bigger or smaller? And that dial is like the money situation.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. I think maybe like final thoughts and then we close this out.
Man,
Does
this
anybody?
is so much fun.
Yeah. But also we have to eat dinner. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Do you have any final thoughts? Something you wish you'd said in the middle or wish we'd covered and didn't? Just
I thought we were going to have like a rebuttal thing. So
Well-
I wrote down like everything that Evan said, but dang.
well, maybe pick one or two and just give your quick.
Yeah, you mentioned like, well, if I shouldn't be involved in politics, then I shouldn't be involved in my church. If human depravity, right?
Yeah.
From a very like reformed, like, oh, human depravity is such a deal breaker, then I shouldn't even be involved in my church. Like, well, I would ask you, like, is the church evil in the same lesser two evils? Like, is the church evil in the same way like politicians are evil? And I would say absolutely not, right? Some can be.
Yeah.
There's definitely some politicians that are going to be better than some pastors and
Yeah.
priests, but yeah.
But
Like,
were you
I don't
maybe
think
just saying that
Is
people are
is that
sinful?
rhetorical?
I don't think they're evil in the same way. Right.
Would you say they're evil in the same way?
I mean, evil is like deprivation of good,
Human depravity,
or like
yeah.
whatever.
So you would say they're evil in the same way because human depravity infects everything.
I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff that goes on in churches for sure.
I would,
And to the extent there's not, it's because there's transparency, accountability,
I would
you
agree
know,
with that.
oversight. There's law.
Ooh.
Well, and I would say churches don't like bomb children in a country ending in stand. Like,
Of course,
yeah,
I'm not.
Sure,
I'm-
sure, sure.
I'm-
And-
my only, again, my point was that if you abstain from imperfect institutions by virtue of their imperfection, then you participate in nothing. Because
Yeah.
even your marriage is imperfect.
Yeah,
At least mine is.
yeah, I'm not.
It's 99.99% perfect, but I mean, there's that.
Oh.
Well,
you know.
your marriage and your family to a greater extent, like it's kind of communistic, right? Like your kids don't like
I wouldn't use that-
contribute.
I wouldn't use that word.
Well, I mean, your kids
It's a
don't.
benevolent dictatorship.
From each according to their ability to each according to their needs, right? I mean, that's how you run your family, don't you?
Okay, that's a total conflation of,
But what I'm,
things.
what I'm, and like, I'm fine with that. That's
Yeah.
totally fine because it's so small, right?
Yeah.
And it's,
Oh, I'm fine with voluntary, communitarianism.
and so am I. And I think the biggest thing is that so much of this is not voluntary. So that's my final thoughts.
All right. Good final thoughts. Anything from you?
Well, I agree that again, but the law exists because we don't do the right thing voluntarily, and so the law is good. I mean, God institutes the law. The whole book of Leviticus is about the law. Do these things. The Ten Commandments are law. So yeah, I mean, there's distinctions between how we choose to live, how we order our lives, and so on and so forth. My only point is that it's very simple, I guess, that if Christians want to exert influence on the world, they should be not less involved, but a lot more involved. Let me make one more caveat,
Sure.
which is one of the reasons I think Christians don't vote is because they think the world is about to end. Because something
man,
like
we could have really spent
Yeah,
some time
I
on
know,
that.
I know.
Wacky
You would be with him.
eschatologies
Yeah.
that I
Yeah,
mentioned.
you'd
Yeah.
be with
but
him on
I
that.
don't, I don't endorse any of those.
No, what I'm saying is like
Right.
you respect the positions of people with wacky eschatologies, even though you
Do I?
don't like agree with it. Oh, do you not?
At the
respect-
beginning, he was saying you're charitable even when you hear someone say something crazy.
I
You guys
mean,
are on the same page
if
about
I'm
your
hosting an
eschatology.
interview, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but no, I'm a millennialist, and
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I mean, I'd be more of a post-millennialist, I guess, if I had to choose. But I'm not a dispensationalist. I'm not a premillennialist, and so these wacky, yeah. So I think pretty wacky ideas that the world is about to end and Israel
none of
has
it
some
matters,
cosmic
and-
meaning and all that has led to disastrous political effects. Gary DeMar talks about this all the time at American Vision. Like, I'm going around telling Christians to be involved in things like, why bother? The world's about to end. So I think it's extremely dangerous, and so I resist. I reject those eschatologies for that reason.
And you'd probably agree with that.
Oh, I
Yeah.
100% agree with
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look at us finding common ground at the end.
I just think it's scary that they
Now
have so
we need
much
a
political
pre-mill
power.
to come on here and fight with these guys. That'll be fun.
Well,
We have plenty
I
of
don't know
us.
that they have political. They could have a lot more political power if they voted,
I-
but they don't vote because of that.
Oh, teaser for an Israel conversation because I think the evangelical obsession with Israel is driving a ton of our foreign policy. So,
Oh, okay. Well, but we'll put a pin in that for later.
Teaser.
So, if people want to find you guys and hear more about your thoughts, the only way to find Ken is to come to our events and let him give you a beer ticket and pepper him with questions.
Or listen to the podcast. I'm on quite a bit.
Yeah.
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 And Evan, where can people find you?
At First Lutheran Church, flhouston.org.
And you can find me at our events, and you can find out, of course, more information, theology, bythepint.org. And until we see you again, we encourage you, as always, to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.
Peace.